Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again with my weekly recap, breakdown, and review of the latest episode of FX on Hulu's American Horror Stories. We're talking episode 6, which was titled Feral, and this series just continues to go down the rabbit hole, and we're gonna break it down. We're gonna talk about spoilers in this review, so if you haven't seen the episode quite yet, go check it out and come back and join the conversation. But before we dive into it, make sure you're checking me out on all my other social media accounts. If you're new to the channel, well, welcome to the community. Consider subscribing to the channel, and while you all are at it, make sure you hit that notification bell. That way you all can get the alert for when I drop new content. If you all enjoyed this spoiler discussion of American Horror Stories episode 6, well, make sure to like and share this video. It helps out the channel a lot, but also appreciate the support. And in the comments, whether you speak positively about the episode or negatively about the episode, let's talk about it. Your pros, your cons. We're at least outside. We're not in a confined space. We're outdoors. We meet these cannibal feral nation characters. Let's talk pros, cons, and talk about where this episode ranks for you as far as is the 6th episode. Is it number 1? Is it number 6? Let's discuss it all in the comments below. And we got one more episode to wrap up this dumpster fire of a spinoff. But here, this is my initial thoughts getting to this review here. I was actually somewhat excited for this episode because when I saw the premise and the first opening said like, oh, we're going outside, because so far, episode 1 and 2, we were confined to the house. Episode 3, we were just kind of confined to the movie theater, and then the trailer, and then episode 4, obviously, we were brought into just the bro house. Episode 5, we were condensed into just another house. So this time we're outside, so that got me a little bit excited. And camping and woods and cannibal people, Bigfoot, all that stuff got me excited. But unfortunately, I have to say, this has to be probably my second worst episode to me. I think still episode 2 is the worst of the bunch, but I think episode 5 episode 6 is pretty up there as far as just lack of chemistry between the two characters, Addie and her husband Jay. The acting from the hunter, Stan, was okay, but the story was a little bit all over the place. Again, the acting really brought this episode down to me, and also the writing. But we're going to find some positives to talk about, but that's just my initial thoughts. I thought this is probably the second worst episode of this spinoff so far, but let me know again where you rank this episode. But let's get into this recap. As we're introduced to the family, and the whole premise of this episode is the family goes out to the woods, and they don't know what's lurking in the woods, and that's when we're introduced to these feral nation, these cannibalistic people, and we meet Jay and Addie and their son Jacob, and right off the bat, we can just see all the tropes, right? We have the wife that doesn't want to go to the camp, we have the husband that knows all the things and wants to take the family out to this secluded area, which is always a no-no in these type of horror scenarios. And then right off the bat, the son Jacob, he was a weirdo from the first time you see him, just looking at his mom and licking his fingers, and just the way he was looking at his parents. Like, this dude is a weird kid, and we'll get to his weirdness a little bit later in the episode. But also right off the bat too, I noticed that the husband who plays Jay is the same actor who was in episode 2, who was the contractor that ended up dying. And that, again, the worst. I just thought about it. It happens to be that was my least favorite episode was episode 2, and now my second least favorite episode is episode 6. It happens to have the same actor in both episodes. I wonder, is that a coincidence? But nonetheless, the intro was pretty cool. There's a positive for you. The intro of this episode, and honestly, all the intros have been pretty interesting. I love the American Horror Story intros because it gives you a little bit of insight of what you can expect from the episode. But 9 times out of 10 with these intros, the intros are like better than the episodes. But nonetheless, we get into this scenario where they spend the night in the woods, and the next morning, Jay wants to take Jacob to fishing. They're playing hide and go seek. The wife stumbles upon a deer that's been ripped in half, and then Jacob goes missing. And this is when I know this episode was going to be terrible. The acting of like, where is he? Jay, where's Jacob? And the scream, I'm like, oh, here we go. We're just going to get into another dumpster fire of acting. But that's just the beginning of the acting of this episode. As we fast forward 10 years later, we see that Jay in a dark place. He's drinking. He's been obsessing over finding his son, which is understandable. Of course, he's going to be looking for his son this whole time. But then he stumbles about this hunter who comes to him with the facts and saying, hey, I have the compass. I have a picture. And he goes into this whole thing about there's a connection between the drug cartel and the trafficking, and they're connected to these growers, which we learn to find out are the actual, the feral nation. Again, the whole setup and the whole thing is just like, Okay, can we just go into the exciting parts, which never really came until literally the last scene of this episode? But we go back to this incredible acting where we see Jay goes back to Addie, who at this point we know that they're separated. I think she's a developer or a real estate. I don't really know what she boxes. I don't know what she does for a career, but they have not been together since, obviously the incident with their son. But he convinces her to go to the woods to find their son. Again, zero chemistry between these two actors as they're walking in the woods and going to the campsite with the hunter, and they're bickering back and forth. We learn that she has separated with her boyfriend or fiance because he wants to start a family. They're going back and forth, and the hunter's like, cut all this nonsense out. You guys can have your marital talk after we find your son. Again, forced drama, forced, conflict between two characters. And again, it looks like those characters were just like, the whole episode felt like that was like the first day of them shooting the entire episode because they had zero chemistry at all, in my opinion. But nonetheless, we're introduced to Stan, who you all remember Stan. This actor has been in various Ryan Murphy projects, whether it be Assassination of Versace, whether it be American Horror Stories, Apocalypse, and even most recently, American Horror Story 1984. So again, all these episodes have thrown in familiar faces that we have seen in the past, American Horror Story connection. So we see that Stan tells Jay and Addie about the incident of the night when their son went missing, and the feral people were throwing rocks at him, and he saw one of them carrying his son. So again, the hunter is trying to obviously distract them, like, no, he's lying, let's continue to go on because he has his own situation going on. And when you see the kid on the shoulder, to me, I'm like, oh, okay, this is like The Hills Have Eyes. These are the same cannibalistic characteristics of those characters, and they eat people, and we'll talk about them towards the end. But we see again, between the terrible delivery from Addie, the overacting by the hunter, I was checked out for like 95% of this episode because it was just really, and again, I am very aware of the cheesiness, the over-the-top acting that this show and this premise delivers, but there's a line of how you can deliver that stuff in regards to stepping over that line and just being bad acting and being terrible dialogue. And this episode was just riddled with just terrible dialogue, poor chemistry, poor execution. I can go on and on and on about just this, how terrible this episode was. But let's get back into it. Out of nowhere, they come across this landfill of a massacre of people, and any logical person would have been out. If I see a field full of dead people, granted, I know they're looking for their son. They've been looking for their son the last 10 years. But listen, you got to come back with reinforcements. After you see a bunch of dead people in the woods, you're out of there. But no, they stay there, and this is where we get exposition dump. The hunter tells them it's all a scam, that it was his cousin. He made up the compass, and he was going to rob them and get rid of the body. And they're just like, well, we're not going anywhere. We want to find our son. And long story short, one of the people wake up and bite the hunter in the neck. And again, terrible setup when he's seeing blood and they'd attack him. It was just, the acting in this episode was on another level. Things get even worse where, he shoots Jay in the stomach when he's, being eaten up. And we get another incredibly boring exposition dump when Stan tells Jay and Addie the whole situation about Feral Nation. They've been here for centuries, and they're descendants of these people, cave people. They eat people. They've been covering, the campsite has been covering this up for years. The army that came in, the U.S. Guard that came in to help them look for their son 10 years ago wasn't there to look for the son. They were just hunting for the Feral Nation. Again, it was just like, it was so boring. I was literally falling asleep when they were going over this exposition dump. But let's wrap up this episode as we see Stan attempts to call for help, but he's attacked by the feral people. They eventually kill Stan and rip out his guts, which was fine, I guess. It was the most exciting thing of the episode. But the twist comes where we see the husband and wife in the middle of the woods. They're being surrounded by the feral people, and then they see their son, who's, again, weird-ass kid. His teeth's all messed up. He sees his parents and like, boo, and obviously the dad's like, oh, we're gonna be safe now. The feral people ask their leader. He seems like to be the leader. I don't know how this 10-year-old that was taken is a leader all of a sudden. Maybe because he was normal, and I don't know why he was a leader, but he's the leader. One of his people asks him, who are these people? And he simply said, he doesn't say mommy and daddy. He says they're dinner, and we ultimately see they eat him, and the blood squirts on his face. He licks the blood in the episode. 39 minutes, luckily. It wasn't that long. It wasn't a super long episode, but it felt like an hour plus because it was just, again, the pacing, the acting, the dialogue, the tropes. It was a bad episode. Again, I don't think it was a coincidence that the same actor that was in episode 2 was in this episode, and those are my least favorite episodes of this show. And again, this show has been a dumpster fire so far. But hey, we got one episode left, and I think I read the synopsis of episode 7. Looks like we're going to be visiting a place that we've seen in this season so far. So we'll see. Maybe the last episode, they've been saving everything. They've been giving us all of this terrible trash. And we're going to go and see something that's good maybe. Who knows? Probably going to be terrible, but we'll see. I'll be back to wrap up the finale. And then obviously the week after that, we'll be back with season 10 of American Horror Stories, or American Horror Story double feature, which I plan on covering on this channel. So again, I know I was extremely negative about this episode, but I just thought it was it was the second worst episode of the show, of the series. And I just thought it was just terrible from beginning to the end. The gut sting was okay, but literally this was a bad episode. Hey, if you enjoyed it, all kudos to you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Share some of your thoughts to me and let me know what was it that spoke to you about this episode. Did you enjoy the acting, the story? Let's talk about it. Or if you were on the other side of the spectrum like me and thought this was a terrible episode, let's talk about it as well. Nonetheless, I do these reviews to interact with you all, and I have such a fun time doing so. So if you stuck around to end this video, make sure if you haven't already to like, share, comment your thoughts in the comment section. Let me know where this episode ranks for you, and let's have a good discussion in the comments below. Thank you all for watching this review. Hope you're staying safe, and we'll see you on the next video.